Well, welcome everyone to today's episode of Cerius Leadership Business Insights for Business Leaders. Today is a really engaging conversation around servant leadership. To lead that conversation, the CEO of Cerius, Pam Wasley.
Thanks, Chris. And I have to tell you, when we first started talking about this topic of servant leadership, I was amazed at how many companies practice this leadership style. Ones like Home Depot, Costco, Nordstrom's, Chick-fil-A. I mean, all successful companies. And I'm really excited to have Mary Scifres and Amy Scott here today because they are experts on this topic. Because no matter what company they have worked with, they've gone in and significantly increased their growth within 2 years. But first, I have a question for both Mary and Amy. And that is, when I say servant leadership, people go, oh yeah, that's that touchy-feely thing, or that's a leader that doesn't know what they're doing and you can run right on over them. So Mary, Amy, what thoughts do you have on that?
Well, I understand the confusion around that. Some people think that servant leadership means subservient leadership, which it definitely does not. Servant leadership, I go with Jim Koussis and Barry Postner's definition that servant leadership is a leader's selfless commitment to a cause, an organization, or a teammate. And when I think about servant leadership, one of the great examples, especially in this definition, is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And when you think about him, you know that is not a person who's soft or touchy-feely. Yes, he was a compassionate, empathetic person, but he was firm and strong and selflessly committed to getting the Civil Rights Act passed. And he did it by using servant leadership, both in his civil disobedience and in his firm demands of the Kennedy brothers and others in leadership as he worked to build the coalitions to get the Civil Rights Act passed. So firm and yet collegial are two of the categories of servant leadership.
Yeah, and I think also from a servant leadership perspective, when we think about it, sometimes we get stuck on that word servant. And really, I think it's turning the traditional hierarchy of management. So usually there's the leader at the top and then the folks that work for them. It's turning it upside down. And it's actually making that big platform the top. And I was reading about some of the things on this recently. And one of the things that struck me was it's talking about the power with, not the power over. And so to Mary's point, I think it's about putting people first. This is the first time we've had 5 generations working in the workforce at the same time. So you can imagine addressing each one equally and the same way is not going to work. So it's really about how do you, as a leader, look at that as a privilege and how you can impact both the people you manage, but also create a culture where everyone becomes leaders and feels empowered.
I hear that, Amy, but when I try to introduce that to some of my clients, they talk to me about, I don't see how that's feasible, Mary. I'm so busy. I have a lot of deliverables. I have a big team to manage. I got to get things done. So how do you think it's feasible, Amy? Have you actually seen places where it really worked and improved, not just everybody's feeling about the company and the company culture, but also the company's actual success?
Absolutely. I think for a lot of us, we started in corporate America as an example, where it was all about results at all cost. And it was really about coming in and doing your job and getting out. And there wasn't a lot of really understanding what's important to a person, how they like to be motivated, how they like to be recognized. And I think all of those elements, it doesn't make us soft. It actually makes us compassionate and caring. And I think, especially when you think about all the different generations who are working together now, that individualization and really appealing to what's important to each person and getting them engaged and empowered in the workforce can be very powerful to meeting objectives. And I think actually helps organizations excel more than what we used to see in the workforce. One of the things I'd also bring up just as a pause is if everyone could stop and think about your favorite teacher. And I'm sure almost to a person, you could name the name of that teacher and what grade you may have been in, what subject they were teaching, and why it was so important to you. I think that's what we should aspire to be as leaders, because years later, I still remember my teacher. It was my second grade teacher, Mrs. Brown. And one of the reasons that I remember her is she didn't just get up and give me the lesson. She really engaged the class, and she knew things about me and how I learned and what was important to me that made me excel in that class. And I think as leaders, we can use that very same model to think about how we appeal to the people that we're working with, working for, and really making them feel special, because they are. That it's people that make organizations work. And so I think if we continue to reflect on that teacher model and think about what made them so special, we can emulate that as well in our leadership capabilities.
That's a great example, Amy. Immediately, my favorite elementary school teacher and my two favorite high school teachers came to mind. And I was just discussing this topic with my son, who's Gen Z, and he said, "Oh yeah, my favorite classes were because of the teachers, not because of the topics." And so I started thinking about those characteristics of his favorite teachers, my favorite teachers, servant leaders I really admire. And I see 5 characteristics that kind of help define and refine what servant leadership means. And they're ones that we can work on. Pam often asks me, well, do I have to work on all of it at once? Of course not. We're busy, but pick one of these characteristics that you're strong at and work on it even more adeptly. One of the ones, and I think you see this often in a great teacher, is humility. And humility is one I've had to work on, and it wasn't one of my strengths. It was definitely one of my weaknesses. As I've matured as a leader, it's been really important for me to move beyond my pride and kind of leaning into my title status and demanding people follow me and letting them decide to follow me, admitting I don't know everything and I need my team more than I need myself. It also means apologizing when I'm wrong, and then leaning into my team's expertise. Especially the older I get, the more I need all of these generations on my team. I used to always need my mentors who are ahead of me. Now I need my mentors who are 2 generations behind me, because they know things I can't even imagine. In addition to humility, closely aligned to that is something you mentioned earlier, Amy, is empathy. And again, people can think that's soft. I'm not talking about how you feeling today? That's more sympathy. Empathy is the maturity to put ourselves in someone else's shoes and try to understand them. This can really help us understand our clients better, our customers better, and our team members, and even our bosses. I recently had a coaching client who was having a really difficult time with her boss. And I said to her, what if you looked at your boss as your most important customer? And it was really hard for her to do that. And I said, what would you do to really serve your most important customer? And she said, well, I really try to understand where they're coming from and what they need. Well, when she did that, she was better able to get along with her boss and complete the projects that he was demanding of her in a way that helped her succeed and get promoted. So empathy, humility, and then one of my personal favorites, which is one of my strengths. So it's one I work on the most because I think it's good to play from our strengths. And that is active listening. Listening in a world that doesn't listen very often. Amy, you've often asked me, can you give me a few more details about what that means? And so I was listening to some others recently, and I was working with a nonprofit board last week, and they were talking about how to face the upcoming political season. As a nonprofit with donors from across the political spectrum, they're a justice organization, so they can't really ignore the political repercussions of the upcoming election, but they need to manage it. And they were debating, do we talk about politics? Do we ignore it? Whatever. And one of the oldest members of the board said, whatever happened to reflective listening? When I was a university administrator, we really worked on reflective listening, reflecting back what we were hearing from students, from donors, from parents, from professors. And he gave an example that when he's on the golf course, he golfs with a lot of buddies who have opposing political views. And instead of arguing with them, he'll say, what I'm hearing you say is this. And then he said about 90% of the time, his buddy responds, no, that's not what I meant at all, Jack. No, what I meant was this. And then they're engaged in a really useful, life-giving conversation instead of a big political argument. And then the other 2 that I put down as characteristics that, again, we can learn are direct engagement. I think Jeff Senegal, who founded Costco, is the perfect example of this, the way that he continued to visit every single store every year of his career until he retired. And that's just deciding that that's going to be on your calendar. And if you're good with people, that's a good one to work on. And then finally, facilitation of the growth of your people. The more that we grow leaders within our organization, the more our organization grows and benefits. So those characteristics, I think, are really important in understanding what servant leadership means.
Well, Mary, leaders are busy people. So how do you, I mean, I heard you say start with one, but how do you pick it? How do you direct and teach a leader who doesn't maybe do any of these right now? How do you teach them to pick the right ones first? And how do you go from there?
Well, I think if I were going to pick the right one first and I didn't know what my strengths were, I would pick something that's very tangible, either direct engagement or active listening. Those are tangible. You can Google them and find about 100 great YouTube videos on how to learn that. And so I would pick something very tangible that you can measure. And you can measure active listening, especially when you're meeting with your team on Zoom. Make a recording and go back and listen to yourself. And if you did most of the talking, you need to work on listening. And do it several times, and you'll see that the more you get curious and the more that you pause, the better you've improved your active listening. And then again, I would say play to your strengths. If you do know which of those is your strengths, play to that one.
I would just add also, Mary, you mentioned curiosity. I think that's one of the biggest tools we have as a servant leader is strive not to be critical, but to be curious. And when you ask people questions, even if something isn't going the way you want, you'll be surprised at what you hear back and how you can probe further to learn more and get more engaged with that person and guide them maybe in a different way than you approach the conversation. So I'm very big on leveraging curiosity.
That's a beautiful example, Amy. And the thing is, curiosity doesn't just benefit me as a leader, it benefits the team member I'm working with because it creates their imagination. I love it when a supervision session, when I ask a team member a question and they say, I don't really know the answer to that. And then silence is golden. In the old days, I would have given the answer. Oh, and here are the 3 steps to answering that question. Now it's I could just sit there silently while their imagination and their problem-solving brain starts coming up with the answer. 2 minutes of silence, and wow, they're off to the races with a great idea they hadn't thought of. I think also when we're helping our team members become better servant leaders, or we want to help ourselves servant leaders, it's good to have something very tangible. So I did develop what I consider 4 steps towards servant leadership. I'm not sure I should call them steps because it's not a scaffold. You could pick any one of these steps and any one of them will start you moving forward. They don't have to be in any specific order. But one of those, it goes back to what you said about the privilege of leadership, Amy, how we turn it upside down. And that means we have to move from overpowering people to empowering people. And that means rather than relying on position and title, which I admitted I did a lot early in my career, we rely more on the relationships and the team. The great thing about this step is it helps you develop humility, and it also equips your people with new skills. That curious question, while they discover an answer or they start unleashing their talent, the whole team benefits, the whole company benefits. What do you think, Amy? Have you seen an example of that in your career or in people that you've managed?
Yes, I have a great example. Very early in my career when, frankly, I probably didn't have any business doing the kind of things I was doing, but I was all brave and thought I had a lot to offer. I had a manager who was really supportive, and I was actually in a medical device world, and I was dealing with surgeons. So I was 23 years old having conversations with surgeons, and we were having this forum, and my manager said, I'm going to let you lead this section. And of course I was terrified, thinking, oh my gosh, I can't believe I don't know how to do this. I'm not sure what to do next. But he was so great because he gave me the confidence to move forward by just saying, here's our objective. You got this. I've seen you in these situations, and I'm going to empower you to do this. And it was probably one of the more pivotal moments in my career because I did a good job, and it really created the ability for me to do something that maybe I wouldn't have had the opportunity to do otherwise, and really empowered me to grow and, excel from there on out. So I think that empowerment piece, and not setting your people up to fail by any means, but being able to give them opportunities and guide them in a way that allows them to be creative and actually most likely results in something better than you would have done just if it was yourself.
Amy, I'm sure that we've all wished we had bosses like you had. But that's not always a possibility because there was a company that I was good friends with the CEO. But he was a domineering manager. So his way of managing the staff was, get it done. I don't care how you get it done. I don't care if it's not right, or if you don't want to listen to what I say, just get it done and get it done now. I mean, literally, he was just rude and crude. Wouldn't listen to anyone, just did things the way he always did. And that was a $5 million company. Well, just recently he sold his company. And the new company brought in this president that was truly a servant leader. The transformation that I saw take place, I knew most of the employees in this company, and I was sure that he would trade out, quite a few of them, but he didn't. He kept most of them, and he empowered them. He listened to them. He encouraged them. What I saw, transform over the last 3 years has been phenomenal. And the end story is, as of last year, they hit $20 million. People are the secret to growth.
Amen, man. People, that's the proof in the pudding, Pam. I mean, it really isn't a soft skill. It's a necessary skill. And what you just gave is also an example of another step, is to value your people, value their growth. They're your best resource, especially in the 21st century. There is nothing more important than the intellectual and people capital that are in our companies. And if we put what's best for our people first, what's best for the organization ahead of our own personal agendas, that's a way of valuing them, of really living into that definition of selfless commitment to our people and to our organization. But it means we have to choose to believe in people. One of my mentors says, I try to see everybody with a perfect 10 on their head. Like, let them move down from there if they disappoint us, but let's just assume that they are at their very best, and let's continue to bring out the very best in them. And along that way, a really tangible way to do that is to affirm them. Celebrate the wins. Don't just move right along after the next win. Celebrate that environment of encouragement when we see their improvement, when we see their growth, to really fuel that with gratitude and encouragement.
It's really sad, Mary. I was looking at a Gallup report that was done, and the Gallup survey actually showed that 1 in 3 employees have not been recognized in the last 7 days. Now, you think about how much time we spend at work versus how much time we spend with our friends and our family. That really can have an impact. And especially if you're going through a hard time at work, or you're trying to solve a big problem. And we talked about Gen Z. The other thing that's really interesting about younger generations is they don't necessarily voice if they have a concern, or if they have, an issue going on. They just leave. And so people who are not recognized at work are 2 times more likely to leave in a short period of time than those that just get those little accolades along the way. And it doesn't have to be this magnificent reward or award. It's all the little things. And it speaks back to being a servant leader in understanding also, how do your employees like to be recognized? I love to be recognized in front of a big group, but I have managed people who are absolutely mortified if that happens. So in addition to understanding how to acknowledge the value that an employee brings, also be cognizant of how they like to be rewarded and acknowledged, so that you can do that in the most positive and impactful way.
You are so right about valuing and letting people know, how they're doing, because can we please get rid of the annual performance reviews? Just get rid of them. I mean, people want to know how they do along the way. Just like you said, Amy, it's just so important. Otherwise, when they get to the end of the year, they go, I did that. I don't remember doing that. And, if I knew about it, I could fix it.
Yeah.
So good point.
And that's really good advice, Pam, too, to think about when we're valuing our people and their growth. We can't wait till once a year to tell them. And we can't wait till once a year to help them grow. If we see that they're falling behind on some technology knowledge, let's get them started on it the day we notice that, and get them the resources and the training they need so that they can grow into the technological ability that we need them to have.
The idea of guiding them along the way is so critical, because also by being transparent with them and being your authentic self as a leader, and really trying to guide and give them, some pointers along the way, and coming alongside them, all of those things also help show value and that you care about what they're doing and how they grow. And I think all of us want to grow in our positions, right? Nobody wants to be stagnant. And so to the point of what Pam, you as well as Mary are saying, getting that along the way and making that a continual growth process is so critical, and not just waiting for a once a year type of sit down, which we all know is not comfortable, and we all focus on the negatives anyway, instead of all the great things we did. And so as leaders, we can really be more cognizant of having that be a continual conversation, which I think can be so valuable.
Well, and I think this one cuts across generations, because we know that millennials and Gen Zs are more likely to stay at a place that values them and lets them develop their own personal growth and professional growth. But I'm increasingly seeing a lot of Gen Xers who are opting out of corporate America when their company isn't letting them grow. So we want to prevent turnover, right? The more that we can promote employee retention, the more we benefit. Harvard Business Review did a really thorough study of contrasts between Sam's Club and Costco several years ago, which was better off financially. Sam's Club saves their money by paying less and fewer benefits. Costco has gone with living wage and benefits. And the cost of employee turnover has been so high at Sam's Club that Costco's benefits their company benefits and their company profits far outweigh the costs of paying their employees a living wage and benefits. And I really celebrate that their newest CEO, just named on January 1st, started out as a forklift driver 40 years ago, 40 years with the same company, and now running the company. That's another great example of what happens when we value our people. A similar category, though, is to focus on those leading indicators of our company and our people instead of the lagging indicators. I know we've got we got to look at our KPIs and figure out how the year went and that kind of thing, but we want to keep our people looking forward and celebrate the wins along the way that keep them moving forward. And yes, celebrate what we did really well in 2023, but what are we already doing well in Q1 of 2024? And what are they personally doing well? What's the growth we're already seeing in them? How do we help everybody get an A? That's our job, especially when we are supervisors. How do we help everybody on our team get an A? Because when they all get an A, the whole team gets an A, the company gets an A. And if we wait until they've gotten a C or a D before we tell them, this goes back to Pam's part. The once a year review doesn't help. We got to help them get an A along the way. And as we're looking at what's working along the way and what are those leading indicators that we want to work toward, it helps pull people into the future in a really, really beneficial way. Have you ever seen an example of where that has helped you or others in your companies, Amy?
Yes. So I think one of the things that I feel like has been really impactful is problem solving. And really, I think creative problem solving can go a long way. And what I mean by that is we all hit roadblocks along the way, right? There's challenges, there's things that we don't anticipate, economic factors, all kinds of things that get in our way of being as successful or maybe on the same track as we had originally expected. And I think if managers can come alongside the employees and really help them problem solve and not just dish out, well, here's what I would do, but sit down and have a real conversation, making sure that they understand what is the issue they're trying to overcome, and then how do they want to go about that, and how can they support them? I think that's one of the key phrases I've heard recently that I think is so amazing is, how can I support you in this? Because you're not then saying, do this or do that, or you did this well, or you didn't do that. You're saying, help me understand where you're at. How can I support you to get the objective that we both want out of this? And so I think I've had some managers that do that. I've really worked to try to do that. And I think if you're a parent too, it works great with your kids because everybody's a little resistant at the beginning, right? Like you're kind of like, oh, I'm dealing with something. I have some emotion around this because it's not going the way I want. And I think if you can serve up this idea of, hey, I'm with you in this, and I'm going to help you solve it, and I'm going to let you be creative with me in that conversation, and I'm going to be here to support you, that is really meaningful to people.
Well, and that brings me to my fourth step, which I find the most helpful for me, because honestly, even as we're talking about this, I'm thinking through all of the examples of the ways I haven't done this well in the last week. These are not easy steps to take whenever you're a type A personality, you have a big company to lead, you have a lot of things that have to get done and goals that you're really passionate about. But one of this fourth step is one that really helps pull me out of that, oh, get it done, done. And that is to move from focusing solely on the company's success to focusing on making each team member successful. And when I remember, hey, my primary role as their leader is to make each and every one of them successful, that starts to build trust. People are more willing to follow me. It doesn't matter about my title or my demanding nature. They're more willing to follow me because they know that I care about them and that I want them to be successful, even if it means referring them to another job opportunity that can pay them more or give them more growth opportunities. And I'm remembering during the pandemic, I heard of a great example of this from a couple of friends of mine who are surgeons. And they were in that pandemic lockdown. They had a couple little kids at home. They were having trouble managing the telehealth visits, let alone, remember, they still had to mask and shield and get into the hospital to perform emergency surgeries. And their head of surgery really worked with them to come up with a flexible schedule. So only one of them worked at home on a certain day and the other one could take care of the kids. And only one of them, their surgery days were on alternating days so that one of them could be home with the kids since there was no childcare available, and the other one could be at the hospital performing the necessary surgeries. And so they didn't participate in the Great Resignation, nor did most of the doctors in their hospital. It was a real amazing success story for one of the hospitals here in Southern California that they kept the vast majority of their doctors and surgeons. And I think it was that putting the individual team members first that really made all the difference for those doctors to stick around.
You know, one of the things I've been thinking about recently that I heard someone say was the best way to get your way is to have many different ways to get there. And it really resonated with me because it made me start thinking about what you were just saying, Mary. We're all individuals. Every single one of us is important. And sometimes I think as managers, we come in with a certain construct, right? Or as a leader, this is how I see the world. This is how I think things should go. And the reality is the world is not like that at all. And things are, speed bumps happen, hurdles, you got to cross over, all kinds of things are happening all the time. And I think if we reframe the situation and reframe our objective as leaders into really, what are we trying to achieve? But man, there's a lot of different ways to get there. It's like traveling across the country, right? You can take a plane, you can take a train, you can take a million different routes to get there. And I think having that flexibility and adaptability when we're leading really gets to a better end result, because then you can meet people where they're at and bring them along with your journey. And you can also be on theirs. I mean, sometimes you may explore and discover things that you would have never had you kept your same construct. So I really like that quote. And I think it especially is useful when we are dealing with adversity or, challenges either interpersonally or in business, just to be adaptable and really think about how to view things differently.
I think I'll add adaptability to one of my characteristics of servant leaders the next time I work on this topic. Thank you, Amy. We've talked a lot today about what's in it for the company, what's in it for the bottom line, and that there are many benefits. But what about what's in it for me as a leader, Amy? What's in it for me?
Sure. So I think one of the most important things as leaders for us to think about, whether we have worked our entire career to be a leader, we've kind of assumed that role as a byproduct of taking on a different position or a different role that we have, is I go back to what I said at the beginning. It is a real privilege to be able to work with and guide people. I mean, what an amazing thing when you think about how you're using your time and your talents. And all of us have those capabilities, right? So we all have something in us that's unique that can help someone else. And I think it gets to the purpose of leadership. The purpose of leadership is giving the best of what we have to others. And man, will you get fulfilled when those people really excel and grow. And if you've ever had an employee that you've led come back years later and say, oh my gosh, you were my favorite manager, or I learned so much underneath you, or you're the reason that X, Y, and Z, there is not a better feeling as a leader, because then you've really made an impact. And I think being a servant leader, that's what it's about. It's giving the very best of what you have, really keeping the employee or the teams at your core as a focus. And it will come back and just be a wonderful way of explaining and exploring and really getting gratified around what you've been able to accomplish. And it's just like that teacher I talked about at the beginning. I think you'll be remembered, but importantly, you will have made a big impact.
Boy, that is so true. And what better legacy can we leave as supervisors and bosses and leaders than to think, I touched a life, I made them a better leader. I mean, now that you said that, it's like, oh, and I remember my favorite boss, and it was my first boss when I moved into my profession. And he was a gentle supervisor when I made some big missteps. But he saw a leader within me, and he's the one who sent me to my postgrad degree. He said, he kindly said, I think you need more training in leadership, Mary. And I know of this great leadership program at SMU I'd like to recommend you for. But it changed my life and sent me on a trajectory of lifelong learning and leadership that might not have been my life if it hadn't been for this incredible boss who saw something in me and valued me enough to support me.
Thank you, Mary and Amy. I am so inspired with this excellent information you shared with us today. So for the audience members, any of you that need, or a CEO that could benefit from learning how to be a servant leader, please let me know, and I will connect you to both Amy and Mary. We'll be sending out their one-pager to everyone who registered today. Thanks to everyone who attended, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.